This is part 2 of the video build log for the Dynam SR trainer. In part 1, we did an overview of the kit and some construction on the fuselage. In this part, we'll mount the flaps and assemble the wings. Let's get started. I mentioned to you earlier that the instructions didn't describe how to mount the optional flaps. So let's talk about that for just a second. First, the flaps are sealed along this line with some double stick tape, and so what we're going to want to do is just provide some pressure and slowly and carefully pry that flap loose. Now this is EPO foam, so it's pretty strong, but still it's foam. So plan on spending 2 or 3 minutes really just gently prying it apart until you can peel that tape back. You maybe can hear it. As the flap starts to come free. Now I had loosened that a little bit before I started the video, so it really took a little bit longer than what it just did. But in any case, you've got the tape here, in which case you can just gently pull it from the foam and you'll have your flap ready to go. The other thing I found with these, they've got little tabs on the end that align, and those usually work pretty well for that alignment process, but I also like to sand them down a little bit just so that there's a little bit extra room as the flaps go in and out, so that I don't end up generating some resistance there for the servo as they hit those tabs in the knockout plugs there in the wing itself. I don't need to cut them off, that's not what I need, but I do need to just shrink them down just a little bit so that they fit smoothly. Okay, the next step in installing the flaps is going to be to add the flap hinges. And so we'll get the glue out that we used before and we'll apply the hinges. Now, the hinges are here and they have a long side and a short side, and the short side also then has a hole in the tab that goes into the foam. Now, the hole we're going to use on the center hinge to mount the control bar or the control rod for the flaps. So in this case, I'm just going to mount the 2 outside hinges first, let them dry, so that when I go and do some of the other work, they'll be firm and I won't be pulling them out. So let's mount those here just very quickly. Again, the hole on the outside, on the flap itself, not on the inside of the wing. Apply some pressure there, put that, get the next one. Again, double check that the hole and the short side of the hinge is in the flap itself, and the long side is in the wing. Put that in there, apply some pressure. And we're going to set that aside and let it set up. Now, while the glue has been drying, I've been doing a couple of other things to get ready to install the flaps. First, I used my hobby knife and pulled out the plug that is molded into the foam wing. Now, that was glued in there pretty well, so I ended up with a lot of little pieces as I pulled that out. But the sides are clean, and so it's a very nice compartment to place your servo in. And I'm going to be using these HXT 900 servos to use with the flaps. Speaking of the servos, I also prepared the servos. I used a small servo tester to center the servo, because when I get it in there, I'm not going to want to mess with the servo arm and the spline. And I also attached a small mini connector to the servo arm, so that I'll be able to attach the push rod to the flaps. Also, because the HXT 900s are notorious for their short servo leads, I went into the workshop and found a servo extension that, when matched up against the one coming from the aileron servo, makes this all the same length. Now, you'll notice that I've also pulled the aileron wire servo wire out of its channel because with this I have a connector. I don't really like to solder, so I just used an extension with a connector on it. And so here in the wing root, I carved out a little foam so that that connector is going to be able to fit flush in there, and then the other servo wire will lay across the top, and you'll see that in just a moment. And then last but not least is getting ready to apply the to go in with the flaps. I made a small cut at the edge right there where the hinge line is on the flap with my hobby knife so that I'm going to be able to push the control rod through that. I really like the way these Dynam flaps work. Those little holes that I mentioned in the hinges is where you connect the Z-bend, and so I've got that constructed here as well. And so I have the control rod pushed through the hole, and then I use a little piece of like 1 millimeter heat shrink as a sleeve because I'm going to have glue down in there, and I don't want to accidentally glue my control rod to the foam. And so with that in mind, I put it in there. I've matched it up with the servo in there before I did it, so I know that I have the Z-bend coming out the correct side of the hinge, and so I'm ready to place that hinge right now. So I'll get the glue out again. And then I'm going to apply some pressure to push that through and get that down in there. I can see that I've got glue on the sleeve, and that's why I have it there, because I don't want it to glue up. And I'll get that in the... And so that you can see I've got the flap mounted there nice. We'll let the glue dry. The control rod is free coming through the little sleeve that I've placed in there. Okay? Now, the next thing is going to be to mount the servo. So I'm going to place the servo in the slot, and you see it fits just very, very nicely. I'm going to not push the control rod through that easy connector right at this minute because I want that glue to dry first. So we've got the servo fit in there just perfectly, and then I'm going to, because I have this connector here, I'm going to use the channel that is already provided, and I'm going to run the servo wire first. That's why I took out the wire from the aileron. I've got it fit in there, push down. There's some stickiness in that to keep the wire in there from when the model was manufactured, so that's handy. And I'm just going to take it all the way through to the end of the wing. And then next I'm going to come back with the servo wire and just push that down into that same channel. The channel is deep enough to accept both of those wires. Work my way down. Again, the servo wire is pretty sticky, and so that's good. I'm going to mount it and go around that connector so it stays flush. Go up through the fairing along the bottom of the wing. And we're all set. That's really all there is to working with the flaps. I'm going to come back, as I said later, and put the wire through the connector by pulling the flaps down so it'll have room to put in there. And then I'm going to be coming back with my hot glue gun, and I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue on the tabs of the servo and maybe a little around the edge because it fits in there pretty tight. And then I'll put a couple of drops of glue along the length of this wire, especially where I've got this connector, to make sure that it all stays nice and flush and snug in the structure when the airplane's flying. So I've do the same thing on the other wing, and then because of the way the flaps are going to be put together, I'm going to run them on a Y connector, and I also have a servo reverser that I can put in line with one of the servos, because it's likely the way that foam is molded is that the orientation of these servos is the same, which means that as with any airplane, because they're backwards, they're going to move, and so the flaps would move up and down like your ailerons do, and that of course is not what we want. And so rather than try to take the servo apart and do soldering and all that kind of stuff to reverse the servo, I'll have a small inline servo reverser that I can put on the channel that's going up to make sure that they both go down when I activate the flaps. Okay, at this point we're ready to glue the wings together. We're just going to be using the kit's glue. We're going to apply some glue to the surfaces of the wing. And so we'll be putting the wings together. Push them in. We're going to make sure that we got the wires through the hole there in the bottom of the wing. This is kind of contact like cement, and so as I've got the glue on the wing, pushed them together, pulled it apart, pushed them together, pulled it apart, let it dry, and then when I push it together for the final time, it really comes together and holds very tightly, so you want to be careful as you use that. We've got a little bit of glue on this sleeve, and that's going to go in there the same way, and that's where the wing bolt is going to be going through to attach the wing assembly to the fuselage. Now, as it's finished drying up, I'm going to put some blue painter's tape across the seam just to help hold it together. And then the fact that the wings have some dihedral to them, by putting them upside down, I'm able to have just the weight of the wing hold the wing structure together. So we'll verify that it's smooth and tight on the inside, put a little bit of tape there as well to help hold that together, and we're in good shape. Let that set up for a few minutes and we'll add the landing gear and the wings will be done and we'll be ready to put this thing together. Okay, our wings have had a few minutes to set up, and while I'm not going to take the tape off quite yet, I think they're good enough shape to allow us to install the landing gear. The landing gear installs just very simply with 4 screws on these lightweight aluminum plant gear legs, and they screw into the plastic mounting plates in the wing, so they go in just very easily. Similar to the nose gear, I'll just put the screws in across from one another, and that's all there is to that. I'll get the one done on the other wing, and our wings then will be ready to install.